What's up, everybody?
Hey guys.
What's up? This is First and 10 Podcast.
On a Thursday.
Coming to you on a Thursday night. A little awkward, a little weird, but hey, we're here. I'm Nick Giamalva. Sitting across from me is Ray Berlett.
As always.
As always, say a quick shalom, Ray. That's good enough. Light giggles equals hello. Brad Pierson is not here. He is still doing training for work. He should be back maybe in the future. I don't know. We are going to take you through the usual tonight. We're going to give you the injuries in the news. We're going to go over our results from last week. We're going to go over our surprises from last week. And then we're going to get into a few listener questions. And then we are, once again, going to give you a second podcast with our projections for the week. As you may be wondering, you're saying, Nick, you're recording right now. The game, Thursday night game, is starting right now.
Nick, what's going on?
What is happening? We did our picks for Thursday night game and put them on our Facebook page. So here's how all of the ways that you can get a hold of us. On Facebook, if you go up to the search bar and you put at First and 10 Podcast, it's all together, no spaces, and the number 1 and the number 10. So at First and 10 Podcast, in the search bar, it's a little picture of a football. You click on that and you like it. You give it the thumbs up. You get all of the updates that I give all the time. That's injuries, that's suspensions, it's our picks from Thursday night. So go like us on Facebook. You can also follow us on Twitter. You can follow me individually at GMLVA15. You can follow Ray at First and 10 Ray. That's the number 1 and the number 10. First and 10 Ray. And you can follow the podcast at First and 10 Podcast. You can also email us, firstand10podcast at gmail.com.
Oh, look, they're little footballs.
Ray is just now figuring out all of the things that we do on social media, so that's great. So we are going to move past that now that we've done that. We're going to get into the injury and the news section. So one story that broke late today was that Josh Gordon is checking himself into rehab. So Josh Gordon, receiver, Cleveland Browns, was due to come back this week. And all of a sudden, we get all these updates. I mean, I got flooded with tweets and ESPN and Bleacher Report. He checked himself into rehab, and his return time is unknown.
My MySpace was going crazy.
Ray's, your MySpace is always going crazy. Let's be realistic here. And so we're going to get into Terrell Pryor a couple times throughout the podcast. A lot of buzz about him right now. After after the news that Josh Gordon's probably not coming back, probably not going to be a Cleveland Brown anymore. Who knows? He may never play in the NFL anymore. It's unknown right now. So that was big news that broke late today. And then we'll get into the injuries real leg. Top of mind, Dez Bryant, receiver, Dallas, had a knee injury, leg injury. He fractured a bone in his leg. They are expecting him out 0 to 3 weeks. And you may say, hey, what does 0 mean? Well, that means originally they said he could play this weekend. Now it's looking a little more like he's going to miss this weekend. Maybe could miss a couple of games, 2-3 games. But an update that I got later on into the day said that the news they got on the injury was that it wasn't overly significant, and with a little bit of rest, he should be good to go. Next on the list is Eric Decker, wide receiver for the Jets. He has a shoulder injury. Originally, he didn't even let the team know that he had an injury. They found out about it on Tuesday. He was set to have an MRI today. It's looking very likely that he's not going to play on Sunday. And that makes you say, well, what about Brandon Marshall now? Brandon Marshall, with his knee injury, is making progress, and he's expected to play on Sunday. CJ Spiller was signed by the Seattle Seahawks. So, they're trying to fill a little bit of a void between Thomas Rawls, who's now injured, and Christine Michael. So Spiller, I think he could come in and provide a little bit of third down back help for them. Probably, this weekend he may get a little bit of playtime, but I wouldn't expect a ton for, the next couple of weeks. CJ Prosise still injured for them also. He kind of would probably fit into that third down role, and they may not even have signed Spiller if he was healthy. Joik Bell, old name there. I feel like he's been around forever, but he's actually still a young man, Ray. He was signed by the Chicago Bears, and with Jeremy Langford missing 4 to 6 weeks, and with Kadeem Carey also out, they just needed a little bit of depth at the position. They're going to be starting Jordan Howard. He's a guy that is available on a lot of waiver wires. He's going to be a hot pickup this week. He may have already been picked up in your league since this is Thursday and not Tuesday.
He was picked up in our league.
He was picked up basically as soon as the waiver wire became available. Somebody had put a claim in for him, which is smart because he's now the starting running back in Chicago. And I think he's going to keep that starting job even when Langford comes back.
For the record, I got him.
Good. Ray got him. Go Ray. Rashad Jennings for the Giants with a thumb injury is unlikely to play at this time. That backfield's going to be, I think, a complete split between Orleans Darkwa, Paul Perkins, and Bobby Rainey, who was with Tampa Bay, kind of a veteran guy there. So I'd kind of stay away from that. If you're in a deeper league, you could pick up Orleans Darkwa. I think he may get some use until Jennings is fully healthy. Russell Wilson with a knee injury is fully expected to play. Willie Snead with a toe injury. It was reported he wanted to play Monday night, but that they held him out. He could be a game time decision. Tajay Sharp was a late addition Tennessee receiver with a hamstring injury. He's kind of a wait-and-see kind of guy, so if you have Sharp and we're planning on starting him, keep an eye out. He could be a game-time decision. Deshaun Jackson is likely to play. He's always banged up. Antonio Gates is not likely to play. And we'll talk a little bit more about Hunter Henry later on in probably the second podcast. Hint, hint. Sleeper pick. Yeah. So T.Y. Hilton is another one that's probably likely to play. He's always on the injury report. Rob Gronkowski said he's very close to 100%, and he's likely to play. Matt Ryan hurt his thumb. It's on his non-throwing hand. He is good to go. Julio Jones with his ankle is good to go. Tevin Coleman with an ankle, good to go. And that's it. That's all we have for injuries and news. Ray, is there anything I missed or anything that you want to talk about?
You nailed it.
Nailed it. All right. We're going to take a very short break. We're going to gather our thoughts and our beers. And then we're going to come back and we're going to tell you our results. And we're watching the Thursday game, by the way. So if you hear awkward things happening, that's probably Ray watching the game. Only Ray.
What?
Only Ray. Yeah. So we'll take a break. We'll be right back with your results from last week.
So unfair.
And our surprises from last week and our board bets. So
unfair.
We'll be right back. Everybody, we're back. That was a quick break. We are going to go over results our surprises from this last week 3, and then our board bets and our pick'em. So actually, we'll start with the pick'em. Last week, our new addition to the pick'em, the podcast pick'em, Nicole, Brad's wife, destroyed everyone in a major way. She went 11-5 last week. The next best was the man sitting across from me, Ray, at 8-8. So 11-5 to 8-8. And then it gets even worse because Brad and I had terrible weeks. Terrible. 6-10. Both of us 6-10 in Pick'em last week. So not good. That takes us for the year. Ray's still in the lead, 27-21. I'm in second, 25-23. Brad's 22-26, and Nicole's 11-5 because last week was her first week. So if you take percentage, I think Nicole's in first. But that's what happens when you don't give me picks for the first 2 weeks. Is you're in last. So and it's not her fault. We just got her in late. So from there, we're gonna go to our board bets, and we didn't have many here, but I'll let you know how this went. Ray said that Odell Beckham Jr. was going to be the number 1 wide receiver in fantasy last week. He finished at number 15. So that is a lie.
This is my favorite part.
Every time.
My favorite part.
Nick, myself, said Victor Cruz was going to finish 5 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown.
Please be a lie. Please be a lie.
He finished 3 catches, 70 yards, 0 touchdowns. So even though I hit the yardage on the head, that is a lie.
Maury Giamalva.
And then I also said Devontae Parker was going to have 100 yards and a touchdown. No, he had a touchdown, but he had 51 yards. So not close enough to give it a push or a win. So that was a lie. And then Ray and I made a bet of $1 American, a Sir Jorge Washington, that Doug Baldwin was my pick, would outscore Carlos Hyde in fantasy points. Doug Baldwin had 30 fantasy points. Carlos Hyde had 25. Both insanely high, and will show up later in our results. But I win the dollar. So the dollar that Ray has never put on in his pocket and has been on our podcast table is now just gonna slide over to my side of the table because it's just gonna be the traveling dollar. We'll just leave it on the table. So that you may wonder what that is. That's Mr. Washington blowing his loves my way. That sounds terrible. All right,
George just blew his loves.
All right, we're gonna move on. We have to move on. So we'll give accuracy rates real quick. I was 43.7% accurate this week. Ray was 41.6. I was 45.8 inaccurate. Ray was 50% inaccurate. And then we both had 10% and 8% even. So a tough week last week. I thought the games were weird. There's loves in there. I thought the games were weird. I had kind of an off week. Ray, you kind of had an off week, but that's all right.
It's a tough week.
We'll try it again this week. We'll go over our results really quickly.
It's so funny. You don't actually know fantasy football until like week 10.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we talk about how week 1 is really unpredictable.
I'll go 8.
But it is unpredictable for quite a while.
It's true.
I mean, look at the teams.
I agree with you.
You don't know who a good team is right now.
Mm.
And if you don't know who a good team is, how do you know who a good fantasy player is?
Right.
There's a lot of up and downs.
Well,
there's a lot of players who rush for 100 yards one week and 30 yards the next. Throw for 400 yards one week. Throw for 203 picks. I mean,
right.
It really is. And I think this season might be even harder than the past.
I agree. I think number one, there's been a lot of injuries early in the year. Number two, I mean, there's maybe 5 backfields that aren't running back by committee.
Right.
And like you said, I mean, guys like AJ Green, Brandon Cooks, Julio Jones, like guys that you are expecting to be studs are having just, down week. Like, I mean, Brandon Cooks and AJ Green, I'm invested in both those guys in multiple leagues. And they've been down the last 2 weeks, down to a point where it's just like they've kind of killed my chances to win a league. Well, not a league. I mean, I'm 1-2. I meant that week's matchup. And those are guys that you feel like you should count on, and they're not going to have 2 down weeks in a row. So, I mean, just like you said, bizarre, tough to figure out so far. But you know what? We're going to keep going. We'll try and get better at it. We'll try and, give you more solid advice if we can. I feel like when we go through our projections, our reasonings are always pretty good. I mean, we watch the games.
We end up agreeing a lot.
Yeah.
We have differences, but we agree.
Yeah. So, all right, let's just go through our results real fast from last week, our best calls and our worst calls. So, my best calls for guys to perform that did perform, we just talked about one of them, Doug Baldwin. He was projected at 13 and he finished with 30. So, he just had a huge week. And I mean, I think it looks like what he did at the end of last year is carrying over. And he could just be one of those guys that, a couple years into his career, something snapped and he's a stud. I don't know. Number 2 for me was a tie between Aaron Rodgers and DeMarco Murray. Both of them were 11 points over projection. I won't go into details. Rodgers was projected at 21. DeMarco was projected at 15. Both just had good weeks. I knew Aaron Rodgers was going to have a big week. I feel like ticked off Aaron Rodgers and ticked off Tom Brady are 2 guys that you never really want to mess with.
So we're 3 weeks into the season, and Marvin Jones is the top.
I know.
Fantasy player.
I know.
It's not a quarterback.
And I was high on Marvin Jones in the preseason, so I'm not like
that high.
Not number 1 high, but all right, Ray, your best picks. Number 1 was Marvin Jones. You picked him to overperform, and he overperformed just a little bit. Projected at 18.
He had his best week last week.
Projected at 18, he finished with 40 fantasy points.
Yeah.
And that's in our league, which is a 1-point PPR. But when you have over 200 yards and 2 touchdowns, even if you're not in a PPR, you're number 1. And your number 2 was a tie between Mike Evans and Carlos Hyde. We talked about Carlos Hyde. Mike Evans was projected at 14, finished with 29. Hyde, 10, and 25. Underperformers that underperformed. My number 1 was Ryan Matthews. Obviously came out with
that was a great
foot, something with his foot. He was projected at 7 and finished with 0. And then also tied for number 1 was Spencer Ware, projected at 13 and he finished with 6. Number 2 was a 3-way tie between TJ Yeldon, Golden Tate, and Jeremy Langford. I'm not going to go through all the projections and stuff. They were all 6 points under what their projections were. Ray, your number 1, which was, I mean, unbelievable call. You had some really good calls, and this was one of them. Kelvin Benjamin, projected at 13. He finished with a goose egg.
0 catches.
Ridiculously good call. They focused in on him. They said, we're going to stop Kelvin Benjamin, and they did.
I am shocked by the outcome of that game.
I am too.
I am too. That Minnesota defense
they're legit.
Much better than...
They're better. I knew they were good going in. I mean,
yeah, but they're better than that, I think.
They're even better than that.
I thought they had a good defense.
Yeah.
They're really great. I mean, I don't know who's better right now. I really don't. I mean, to beat Carolina, that's...
Well, to make them look the way they did.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
right.
Unbelievable. And then your second best underperformer call was C.J. Anderson. Projected at 15 and finished with 4. So we'll move to sleepers now. Best sleeper call for me was Tevin Coleman, running back for Atlanta.
Oh, wow.
He was part of a dual backfield with Devonta Freeman that absolutely just opened up on New Orleans. He was projected at 12, finished with 29. My second best sleeper call was Darren Sproles. Projected at 11, finished with 24. Obviously, we're in a PPR league, so most of those points came from his receptions. He finished with 6 catches for 120 yards and a touchdown. So, didn't run.
Really
I think he had 2 runs for -1 yards.
Yeah,
so
but he had a really long reception.
Yes, he did, and it was a great run after the catch too. Your number 1 sleeper, which was once again a really good call, on the fact that everyone was so down on him, Emmanuel Sanders. Projected at 13, finished with 32 points. Just had a monster day. Your second best, also a guy people were super down on, Coby Fleener.
Okay, yeah.
Projected at 10, finished with 23. Finally looked like the guy he was supposed to be.
You and I were really close to being very down on him.
Yeah.
I mean, that was about Kobe's last chance.
I mean, if he wouldn't have showed up against Atlanta, we would have been talking, do we need to drop this guy and pick up anybody else?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, so we'll move on to our worst calls. Go through these real quickly. My worst call on a performer that didn't perform was C.J. Anderson, one of your good calls for underperformer. Like we said, projected at 15, finished with 4. My number 2 was a 2-way tie between Will Fuller and Joe Flacco. And Joe Flacco wouldn't even have been on there, but he started throwing picks late in the game. That game was crazy. But, oh, what a catch. A.J. Green just made a ridiculous catch. Late in the game, Flacco, he was throwing picks, and both those guys were 8 points under what their projections were. Your worst performer that didn't perform, Julio Jones. Projected at 23, he finished with 2. He had 1 catch for 16 yards. I don't think against the Saints, I don't think anybody saw that coming.
I didn't even know that until right now.
Yep. And your second worst was Eric Decker. Projected at 16, finished with 4. That was another game where Ryan Fitzpatrick decided that he was going to throw 6 interceptions against Kansas City. And then, come to find out, he had a shoulder injury that was lingering from the week before. Maybe that had something to do with it. I'm not sure. My underperformers that performed, we just talked about him. Ray, he's our number 1 for both of us. Devonta Freeman. Both thought he'd have a down game. Not so much. 13 projection. He finished with 31. He just, once again, blew up along with Tevin Coleman against a terrible Saints defense. Really bad Saints defense. And then we talked about both of these guys earlier. My number 2 worst was Carlos Hyde. And your number 2 worst was Doug Baldwin. The 2 guys that we had a board bet against. And then for sleepers that stayed asleep, head on the pillow, blankets over their faces. Number 1 for me, Philip Dorsett, wide receiver, Indianapolis. Projected at 11, finished at 5. I thought he'd have a bigger role with Dante Moncrief out. Number 2 for me was a 2-way tie between Chris Hogan and Quincy Enunwa. Both were 5 points under their projections. Your number 1 sleeper that stayed asleep was a 2-way tie between Andre Johnson and Brandon Marshall. Both were 7 points under their projection. Andre Johnson actually had a goose egg. And then your number 2 was, I think the first time this has ever happened, a 4-way tie. Golden Tate, Matt Asiata, Goodwin from Buffalo, and Jeremy Langford. All of them were 6 points under projection.
Those are really good players. They shouldn't have even been sleepers, to be honest.
I don't. Well, I mean, 2 of them I'd say yes. I mean, I don't know. You could put Golden Tate as a sleeper now because he's literally done nothing this whole year. So, we'll move on now to our surprises.
Okay.
For the week. This has actually turned into like one of my favorites. And so we'll go through a good surprise and a bad surprise. Ray, who's your quarterback surprise on the good side?
It's got to be Jameis Winston. He was pretty much the top performing quarterback. I mean, he definitely threw the most yards. He was over 400 yards. He threw again 58 times. 58 times they let him throw. It just really shocks me how often that offense is going through him.
Yeah, they actually, their coach, what's his name? Is it Cutter?
I have no
Kirk
idea
Cutter?
who the coach of Tampa Bay is.
He came out and said that he wants to get the running game more involved, which doesn't shock me when you have a quarterback throwing the ball 58 times. My surprise on the good side was Trevor Siemian, quarterback for the Denver Broncos. He finished as the number one quarterback in most scoring formats. He scored 34 points in our league. He threw for 312 yards and 4 touchdowns with 0 interceptions. For a guy that it's his first year in the NFL, a guy who is in a system where they rely heavily on the run, that's an impressive week, and that really, really surprised me. Let's say with quarterback, who's your surprise on the bad side?
It's simple this week. Carson Palmer. The Cardinals in general have let me down this season. What are they? They're 1-2, and they were a deep playoff, if not Super Bowl pick. They were fantastic last year. Everybody returned. Their running game has mostly improved from last year because they got David Johnson starting every game, and Carson Palmer. What did he throw 4 picks versus Buffalo? I mean, they lost a game to Buffalo, so he's my underperformer for his quarterback.
Yep, I had him written down, and then I had one other guy written down.
Ryan Fitzpatrick? Yep, I scratched him out.
6 picks. Carson Palmer finished in our league -6. Fitzpatrick finished at -9.
Fitzpatrick threw 6 picks?
6 interceptions against Kansas City. Yes, he did.
6?
6 interceptions. 6 interceptions.
I should have stayed with Ryan Fitzpatrick. I didn't know he...
Well, I had both.
Is that a record?
I would bet for him individually. I don't think in an NFL game that's a record.
6
interceptions.
Yeah. I cannot imagine that there is many people who have more than 6. I mean, 4 is a really bad week. I can't remember the last time I heard of 5, but 6.
Yeah, I mean, every time.
How do they not take him?
Every time that Kansas City and the Jets popped up on the Red Zone channel, it was a frame-by-frame shot of Ryan Fitzpatrick throwing an interception.
I did not know he had 6 picks.
Yeah. So,
I had him written down.
And both of those guys are people that have been proven to be smart quarterbacks, and have good performances. I know a lot of people were really hoping Carson Palmer would play well against Buffalo. So that's my surprise was both Palmer and Fitzpatrick.
You surprised me with your surprise.
So. Let's go to the good surprise on the running back side. Who do you got, Ray?
I put down Devontae Freeman. We've been very low on him, both of us, this whole season. I don't know if that's going to change much, but he did have a good week versus New Orleans. 14 carries, 152 yards. He got it done.
I agree. This play just happened. I think their returner took one toe out of the end zone, and I think it could be a safety here. He brought it back in. While I give you my good performer, why don't you take a look at this? So my good, and I know we're supposed to do just one, but I have 2. Number 1, Christian Michael. He had 24 fantasy points in our league of record. Ran for 20 times, 106 yards, and 2 touchdowns against San Francisco. I know San Francisco is not a great team, but it's Christian Michael. He's bounced between how many teams, and they said he looked great this year. I hadn't seen it yet. I saw it last week. He finished in our league the number 8 running back. And another one I wanted to throw in, because I was just shocked at the performance, and of course I sat his butt on the bench, Jeremy Hill against the Denver Broncos.
Yeah, of course. Right.
Goes 17 rushes, 97 yards, and 2 touchdowns.
It's a good honor.
So why wouldn't a team who Jeremy Hill just up and down all the time? You never know when to start him. So why not the one game you should have started him be against the best defense in the league? So those are my 2 surprises on the good side. Ray, who do you got for the bad side surprise?
Latavius Murray. I was high on Oakland. I don't remember what you were. I was really high on Oakland. They are underperforming as a team this year, but a lot of that is contributed to, well, one, their quarterback. I'll say he's not playing like he did last year, but Latavius Murray, he's not running like he did last year. 10 carries, 37 yards. He had a touchdown last week, so fantasy-wise, he did okay because he had that touchdown, but 37 yards, you can't deal with that when you're playing Tennessee.
They're in a split. They're in a 3-way split at running back. And right now it's whoever has the hot hand is what it's at right now. I think partway through this, if Latavius Murray starts doing very poorly, it's going to be DeAndre Washington's job. He has impressed there, and I think they're in trouble. And for right now, like you said, he got the touchdown. He's doing enough with his touches right now that he's going to still be in the mix and probably the lead hand to start it off. But he needs to have a game that pops.
Agreed.
Soon if he's going to keep that job. And I invested in Latavius Murray in a league, and I'm very nervous. In fact, I sat him this week for that reason.
Running backs, however, this year are like that. I think both of my leagues, the top 2 that I planned on starting all year are not the top 2 that I started in week 3. Yeah. I mean, I'm already nervous about a couple of mine. So there's some running backs in this league, Latavius Murray being one of them, that, as you said to kick off the show, there's too many by committees, and the guys that were good last year aren't making it happen this year. Who's your... Who are you sad about?
Mine was Spencer Ware. He finished with 6 fantasy points. And he ran the ball 20 times and he had 75 yards. So not a great game, but not terrible. But when you're going against the New York Jets, you always think, the running game's going to be, who knows how the running game's going to be. The Jets typically have a good defense, especially against the run. But when Ryan Fitzpatrick is throwing 6 interceptions and basically you're up 17-3 most of the game, I think better than 20 and 75 is expected. Mm-hmm. And honestly, I think he should have been more around the 25-30 touch range. So I was surprised based on his usage and also based on where he finished in comparison to all of the other crazy running backs that we had last week. So we will move over to wide receivers. Who's your good surprise on the wide receiver side, Ray?
Simple. Marvin Jones. Over 200 yards. I believe that's the first receiver over 200 this year. He had 6 receptions. How can you catch 6 and have over 200 yards? It's ridiculous. 2 touchdowns. It's Marvin Jones.
Yeah, that was, and I wrote him down, and I wrote right next to him, too easy.
Yeah.
So I had to make a different pick.
Awesome. Who'd you pick?
My pick was Terrell Pryor.
He
was number 5 in our league.
He's shocked.
But listen, here's the deal. He had 35 passing yards. He had 21 rushing yards, and he caught 8 passes for 144 yards.
That's a complete game.
Didn't have any touchdowns, but he had 30 fantasy points. And listen, if this guy is going to be involved in all 3 facets of an offense, I mean, how do you sit him? I mean, he could be getting you points upon points upon points, especially if he starts getting in the end zone. And there's a question coming up in the listener questions section, so I'm going to move off of Terrell Pryor for that reason because he's going to be brought up later. Ray, who's your disappointment at the wide receiver position?
Hopefully you have something else written down. Mine's pretty obvious. Again, we've talked about him already, Kelvin Benjamin. He was targeted 1 time, pass was broken up, guy finished with 0 catches. He's kind of been a stud this year. I thought he was going to be a stud this year. I mean, he could be a stud this year, but to have a game with 0 catches is ridiculous.
Yeah. Mine was Julio Jones. 1 catch for 16 yards in a shootout against the Saints. I mean, obviously the running backs took over that game, which I mean, it is what it is, but I mean, Julio Jones is considered one of the top 5 receivers in the game. And really, if you want to look at that night, you could also throw Brandon Cooks in there because they both disappointed on a very large level. But Julio Jones, 1 catch for 16 yards in a high-powered offense against a defense that can't stop anything. Surprise in a really bad way. And I know he probably lost a lot of people their fantasy matchups. So, Ray, who do you got for a tight end that surprised you in a good way?
Well, it was my boy, Kobe Fleener. And again, 109 yards, 7 receptions, and a touchdown. We talked about him. He finally had a game. And I was a little bit surprised because I didn't know if he was going to come on this season.
Yeah, so there were actually quite a few to kind of choose from at the top this week, which surprised me.
So I have an honorable mention to Jimmy Graham.
So my pick was Jimmy Graham.
He hasn't been around for several months at least.
I mean, it was the beginning of last year before he hurt his Achilles, and you know we've heard so many people say a lot of people can't come back from Achilles injuries. Well, he had 6 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown. That's good enough for, in our league, a top 5 tight end. I told somebody to sit Jimmy Graham over a different person, and luckily they did not listen to me and either forgot to switch it or decided that I was crazy and left Jimmy Graham in. After looking at the team, I'm glad he decided to leave him in, obviously. But I really didn't expect that. And, you know, if they can get a receiver, a Jimmy Graham, and a Christian Michael going in Seattle, it might be all right this year. Again, who knows? Who was your disappointment or your surprise on the bad side?
Rob Gronkowski. Pretty easy. I don't know why they played him. He wasn't full strength. That was obvious by how much he played. But he played enough that it was kind of like the guy must be healthy. He's playing, but we're not going to throw him the ball. It was really odd to me. I couldn't believe it. So he was my biggest surprise. I mean, I thought, you know, people were plugging him in before the game because
you have to.
He was playing, and for him to do nothing was odd.
Yep. Mine was also Rob Gronkowski. I mean, it's and the thing is, you know, you have Gronkowski on your team. You sit him for the first 2 weeks, but the tradition with him is when he's available and he's playing, you're playing him because there's no better tight end in the league.
Right. You just got screwed.
Imagine, obviously this one didn't work out, but imagine if you would have sat him and he would have gone 7 for 110 and a touchdown.
Right.
You would have been kicking yourself because after that you would have said, it's Rob Gronkowski, I shouldn't have played. Or I should have never taken him out of the lineup after an update where it said he was healthy. So, for that reason, I completely agree with you. Gronkowski was my surprise on the bad side.
All right.
We're going to take another small break, and then we are going to get into some of the listener questions, the listener cues. We have a couple today.
Cue them up.
So, we're going to cue those up here in a minute. So, hang out with us. We'll be right back.
Hi, Logan.
Listener questions. Logan is not in it.
What?
Hey now. We'll be right back.
So I can fight to keep the dream alive. My price, I will not pay tonight. Ignite the place where I stay clear inside.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back.
Party people.
It's Q&A time. You guys got the Q's. We got the A's. And not the Oakland A's. Alright. Here we go. So the first question comes from a friend named Tyler.
Mitch.
Not Mitch. Tyler. Hello, Tyler.
Hello. Ooh, I'm playing against AJ Green.
So his question, yeah, AJ Green's going off. We'll get to that in our next podcast. Tyler's question, and it's a really good one.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. It's a really good one.
Let's hear it.
Any suggestions on sleeper running backs? I love these questions. I love trying to figure out who sleepers are going to be. I do have a few. So, if Kenneth Dixon from Baltimore is still available in your league, he's injured right now. He's probably going to be injured for maybe another week or two. He is a guy to stash because Baltimore's running backs right now, no good.
Yeah,
they're bad. So he's a rookie. They drafted him. They liked him a lot. He got injured early, and he's going to have a straight line to the starting running back position in Baltimore. There's going to be nothing in between. That's a good one. My other one is Dwayne Washington in Detroit. This guy, 6'2", 210 pounds, runs a 4.4 40. They kind of compare him size-wise to David Johnson. Got that size. Didn't get a lot of touches last week. I actually picked him up to stash him last week. And then actually had to drop him because I had Antonio Gates, who didn't play, so I had to pick up a different tight end. But then I re-picked him up this week. They've already said in Detroit they're looking to get him more touches and more involved. Obviously, Theo Riddick's going to be involved. He's going to keep his same role. But I think Dwayne Washington could be their running back of choice through the tackles, goal line, that kind of thing. So there's two right off the bat. I mean, and we could keep rolling down the line with this because as we talked about earlier, there's only like 5 teams that are sticking to a one running back scheme. Ray, do you have any running backs off the top of your mind?
So it remains to be seen, but I do like Jordan Howard for the Bears.
I don't know if he's a sleeper anymore though.
Come on, he's a sleeper.
With him being the only running back on the roster right now, other than Joik Bell, I mean,
yeah, but what happens when everybody's full health?
Yeah,
he's got potential to be a sleeper.
Yeah,
if he performs right now, Langford's not coming back.
Yep, I'll agree with that. Yep.
How about Fozzie Whitaker? He's got some hoops to jump through, but I think he's got some potential.
He's looked good the last 2 weeks.
Gosh, there's another name, and I cannot think of it. I've been trying to think of it since we started talking.
We talked about DeAndre Washington in Oakland earlier. That's one that could overtake Latavius Murray.
Absolutely.
And we're trying to think of these off the top of our head because it was a question that came in a little bit later.
There have been some underperforming running backs, as there have been underperformers through week 3. I mean, everybody's underperformed, it seems like. So I think that leaves the door wide open for sleepers. Pick a team, look at the second available running back. I mean, it's tough. Gosh. There's one that's slipping my mind, but maybe later in the podcast I'll think of it.
Yeah. So thank you, Tyler, for the question. I hope those were a couple of names that'll help you out. If we think of more, we'll try and get back to you a little bit later. But hopefully, those help you out a little bit.
As an Eagles fan, I will say that obviously we're doing a committee, but judging by 3 weeks through the season, Ryan Matthews is not a fantasy performer. Sproles is not a...
He's a PPR. He's a PPR option.
But he's
Smallwood.
He's not an every week. He's not consistent. He's not a consistent performer. But yeah, you look at Smallwood and you're like, wow, dude performs when he gets his opportunities.
Yep.
So there's a lot of those guys out there, and it's making this season very tough.
Yeah, and I mean, you know what? Another guy that's available in a lot of leagues still is Tevin Coleman. I can't believe how many leagues he's still available in.
I can't believe that it's true either.
But, he's going to be in a time split all year with Devonta Freeman. They like Devonta Freeman. They love Tevin Coleman in Atlanta. They love him. Everything that comes out of their beat reporters, their team website, they love Tevin Coleman. So, I mean, that's another one. If he's still available in your league, go get him. I'd be surprised if he is, and he shouldn't be, but worth a look. So, thanks again for the question, Tyler. We're going to move on to our next one.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler. And our next question is from a friend named Stason. Hello, Stason.
Hello,
And
Stason.
he has a question that we talked a little bit earlier about. Terrell Pryor. His question is he a must pick up if he's available? And if you have him, do you start him?
So I'm going to start with this because I am low on Terrell Pryor. I do not like Terrell Pryor. I think it is a fluke. He has shocked me in the first couple of weeks, but I think I have somewhat of a bias against Terrell Pryor, so I don't even want to comment because for whatever reason, I don't think he's going to perform, but it is somewhat of a bias. I'm against Terrell Pryor. And I've been wrong before on some of those, including Russell Westbrook last year. Or Russell Wilson last year.
That's like the fourth time you've said Russell Westbrook and meant Russell Wilson.
I'm a pretty big NBA fan. Go Blazers.
Sure.
Portland Trailblazers, they're the best
team.
as everybody knows.
I mentioned Terrell Pryor early on in the year as somebody that could be a sleeper. With the news coming out about Josh Gordon, that leaves Terrell Pryor as the number one option there. Corey Coleman's still hurt. He's going to be hurt for another, probably 3 to 5 weeks with a hand injury. Listen, here's the deal. If he's available, you absolutely pick him up. If this guy's going to throw 5 passes a game, he's going to run the ball out of the backfield or, a jet sweep. And I mean, obviously he can catch the ball. He was the only option other than Gary Barnidge last week, and he put up 8 and 144 on the Dolphins. Now, obviously the Dolphins aren't the best defense in the world, but
they're not horrible.
They're not terrible. I mean, they're
supposed to be pretty damn good this year, to be honest.
Yeah, they're supposed to be.
They're underperforming, but come on.
But yes, if he's available, you pick him up immediately, and even if you have better starters, you at least keep him on your bench because you want to block that type of talent from somebody else picking him up. Because that is the kind of guy that if he goes off, he could beat you. He could be the sole reason that you lose a week.
He's tough.
And then, do you start him? That depends on who you have. I mean, if you have, Julio Jones and Marvin Jones, which was possible in the type of, where they were going in drafts, then you're probably not starting him. Flex worthy for sure in that lineup.
What if you're in a 5-receiver league?
If you're in a 5-receiver league, yes, you could start him. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if he, like I said, he's putting up points at 3 different positions. So yeah, that's my feeling on Terrell Pryor. Will he put up the type of numbers he did last week? That's going to be tough. I mean, 8 catches for 144 yards plus some rushing and receiving. But at the same time, I mean, Gary Barnidge, and the running game are about all they have right now.
Next
Q question.
Thanks, Slevin.
Stason. Oh, boy. Next question comes from a friend, Andy. Hi, Andy.
Hey, Andy.
His question is, this week at quarterback, do you start Ben Roethlisberger against Kansas City after what they did to Ryan Fitzpatrick, or do you start Matthew Stafford against Chicago? You start Matthew Stafford against Chicago.
Yes.
Listen, I know this could be a Big Ben angry game after what Philadelphia did to him last week.
I don't care.
And they're at home, but the Chicago Bears defense is terrible. I mean, you saw what Dak Prescott did against them last week. He did whatever he wanted. And of course, Detroit's they're gonna mix in the running game, but their bread and butter is their passing game. They have 3 receivers that are very good. If Eric Ebron's a really good tight end, and they're in an offense that likes to throw the ball. No matter what they say about trying to get Washington more touches and Riddick more touches, they love passing the ball. Chicago is terrible, and you play Stafford. No doubt. No doubt in my mind.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say anything different. And honestly, this question makes me...
It makes you think a little bit.
I don't think it does. It makes me... All it makes me think about is, like, how many great games has Roethlisberger had? Like, he's a really smart, great quarterback, but is he good fantasy-wise? Like, I don't know. I don't think of him as being a great fantasy quarterback. They have a very balanced offense, for one.
Other than Antonio Brown, I don't like any of his receivers.
I guess I don't know what he did week 1 and 2 because I don't have him.
That was one of my reasons.
It seems like a super easy pick for me, Matthew Stafford.
That was one of my reasons preseason why I said he's one of the guys ranked in the top 10 to finish outside of the top 10. I'm just not. I mean, he's got Antonio Brown. He's getting Le'Veon Bell back this week. I think it's going to be a pretty decent timeshare between Bell and D'Angelo Williams until he can get... Well, I'll give like 70 or 80... 70, 80, 30, 20 towards Le'Veon Bell. But I don't know, man. I'm not impressed with...
Fantasy-wise, I love Stafford every single week, no matter what the matchup is, versus Ben Roethlisberger, no matter what the matchup is.
Yeah.
I mean, Chicago... It doesn't matter the matchup. I mean, Detroit's going to throw it.
You thought Green Bay's defense gave up a lot of points to Stafford and Marvin Jones last week. It could be the same exact thing plus more against Chicago. Yep. They're that bad.
Marvin Jones could score 80 fantasy points.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So...
7 touchdowns.
That is the answer to that one. And then one real quick
Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. One real quick throw in. Somebody, Melissa, who had a question last week, messaged me earlier and said, if Gronkowski is a go, do you play him?
Yeah, and it's impossible to sit him.
We answered it earlier. It's impossible to sit him. I had already answered her directly back on that one that... You know, when you have the best tight end in the league and the team says he's a full go, you can't sit him based on the opportunity. So, thank you everybody for the questions. Once again, you can ask us questions on our Facebook page at First and 10 Podcast, all together, no spaces. Search bar, like our page, ask us questions on there. You can get a hold of us on Twitter. Me at GMLVA15, Ray at First and 10 Ray, number 1 and 10, or you can always email us. Our email address is firstand10podcast@gmail.com. So we're going to wrap up this podcast. Thank you to our music by Static Signal. We'll give them another shout out in the next podcast, which we're about to do right now, which is going to be our projections for week 4. So jump over to the other podcast. You know you want to because it's going to be good. And we'll see you guys in a few minutes because I know you're going straight to the other podcast. Love you.